Thank you all for joining us for our very first presentation in our Spring Basics Gardening series. We have Master Gardener Linda Jakle with us, and we'll be learning more about site selection and soil today. I want you all to know that this series is intended for beginning gardeners or gardeners with just a little bit of experience, and I'm really excited for it. And please join us for our next two. We'll be meeting on Tuesdays at 2. So thank you so much for coming. I'd also like to thank the land that we stand on, the air, the water, and we respectfully here at K-State Research and Extension acknowledge that we are on the traditional ancestral lands of the Osage Nation. The process of knowing and acknowledging the land we stand on is a way of honoring and expressing gratitude for the ancestral Osage people who were on this land before us. So thank you. Without further ado, Linda, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm excited.
I am too. I'm glad to hear so many people are interested. As we go throughout, I will be asking for you to hit next, I guess I should say, for the next screen. So let's start right away with next.
Oh yeah, oh sorry, if you can't see the screen, you can minimize your thumbnails of the little pictures. I hope that you can see all of Linda's presentation that she's prepared for us. And if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. Sorry about that, Linda. Okay,
That's
next.
okay.
Oh, and not to forget that K-State is an equal opportunity employer. So thank you.
Okay, today it is garden site selection and soils. Next. These two principles, selecting your site and having healthy soil in your garden, really the first two steps for any type of garden, whether it be a vegetable garden, perennials, or even if you're planting trees. Next. I'm going to divide this into two pieces. The first part is determining your site. And I've divided that into your purpose, your access and views, and microclimate. I'll ask for questions after that, and then we'll move on to learn and improve the soil at your site. We'll talk about structure, fertility, pH, and improvement. Next. All right, first consideration is purpose. A lot of people, I'd say most people, are going to have a purpose in mind before they even start to plan their garden. And this one, I would guess that the purpose was to delineate the two backyards from each other. And also to make it, of course, a nice view from both sides. Next. Oftentimes, however, there can be more than one purpose. In this home, the driveway is off to your left and the garage sticks out maybe 8 feet in front of the house. So when you come up the driveway and want to go down the sidewalk, you can't even see the front door. So the purpose of this could be to welcome visitors to the front door with the beautiful focal point. But while they're doing that, they can also hide that concrete foundation, and they can provide a buffer strip between their lawnmower or their weed whackers and the tree trunk. So even if you know your first reason or purpose, think about other purposes you may be able to work into the same plan. Next. All right. Several different reasons, but we'll just go on past that. I think you probably understand. Let's next. All right, number 2 is to decide access and aesthetics. By aesthetics, I mean, what are you looking at? What are your views? For access, I guess one of the most important ones to consider is what location of water. If you have an outdoor faucet in the northeast corner of your house, you don't want a garden such as a vegetable garden that takes a lot more water into the opposite corner of your backyard. You also need to consider any paths or steps needed for access, or any special considerations. If you have someone in the family who likes to garden and they're in a wheelchair, they're going to want probably a raised bed and a path to get there. So think through, walk around, look at access points for you. Then the next one is aesthetics or views. Of course, I hope nobody has this camping trailer in their backyard or in their neighbor's yard, but go inside your house and look out your windows, especially the living room, your dining room, kitchen areas that you and guests look out, and decide, is there something that needs to be hidden, or is it a very big plain place that needs a focal point? After you've done this from inside your house, then go ahead outside. Sit on your patio, see how your house looks as you drive up to your up your street and up your driveway, and make those considerations. You'll be happier in the long run if you do. Next. Okay, this is a good example. This is a home of a woman here in Topeka. Her name's Joanne Harrison, and she's this wonderful lady who allowed me to come and take pictures of her home. And this demonstrates the access and the views. If you look at the potted plants that you see on either side of the bench, and if you look at the pond here, you realize that those two have to be filled from a hose. So she has her water spigot nearby. The rest of it, I do believe, is a drip system, in-ground drip. She also wanted a place to sit and look out over her property, and she put a bench here. It's nice that there is a sidewalk, so you can come from the patio on your left, the driveway on your right. Even if you have mobility issues, you should still be able to get there. Then let's look at views. She had just put her planting on the inside of the sidewalk. She wouldn't have had the beautiful view that she has from these windows. So she looked out and said, I want something on the outside of my sidewalk. You also notice if you're in the yard looking in, or if you're a neighbor that lives back behind her, you would not see the water faucet because she has it hidden with a bush. And the beautiful bench would not show up as much if it was just up against the fireplace wall. This way, she put a green plant behind it, sets it off. So in other words, please keep all these ideas in mind: access and aesthetics. Next. Now to the more science-based things to talk about. Do you know the difference between climate and microclimate? I'd say most of you do not, at least I didn't. Your climate is, as you can see by both of these maps, you have it in common with your neighbors and with the people across town, maybe even across the state or other states. That is, how cold does it get? And how many days of cold? How hot does it get? What about humidity? You can't change these. Next. Microclimate is something, however, that you can manage. It's a small area that has different conditions than another small area. If you look at the number 1 on this diagram, you see it is on top of a hill. Think about how much sun does that get? Think about how intense that afternoon sun is. Think about drainage, what happens to the water when it rains. And think about the wind. Next. I'm going to go through each of those 4 microclimate issues. The first one, of course, was the amount of sun. Now, when you hear the amount of sun something does need to grow, you hear an amount of time. So if that time is in the morning, if it needs 6 hours, 6 hours in the morning is equal to 6 hours in the afternoon as far as time, the required amount of light for something to grow. But you also need to look at what it's like in different seasons. if I were going to plant these crocuses and I went out in late summer, early fall, I would think, oh, they need sun and it's under a tree, so I can't plant it because it's in shade. However, if I had already thought about my sunlight throughout the seasons, I'd realize that these crocuses, as well as many other spring bulbs, only need that sun when they're actively growing and in bloom. And that's in the spring when the leaves are gone from the trees. So you could plant them. Now, in the shade of a building, of course, that would not work because that's consistent shade. Next. Another issue with light is the intensity. This Solomon seal plant here wants part shade, part sun. That means, oh, 3-4 hours would be great for this. However, this only got, I barely got 3 hours, but it was hot afternoon time when it got its light. So the solar intensity burned it to a crisp. It needed more shade, or in the afternoon and in the morning, it needed its sun. So that's something else you're going to have to, and when we talk in the next webinar, we'll talk more about choosing your plants, and I'll help you then learn how to find out if this is an issue with your plants. Next. And then there's strong winds. Strong winds, they dry out the soil and they desiccate your foliage. The other thing that they do is they can damage your blooms. If you want your tulips to look like this picture, smaller picture on the right, and not like the picture on the left, you need to plant them in an area that has some protection from strong winds. So go out and in your property where you think you might want your planting, and note throughout the season how strong the winds are and where they come from. Next. And then there's ground moisture. Okay, a low spot gets drainage off of the sidewalk and it collects water. These plants will drown if they're not rain plants, if you don't have a rain garden type. The one on the right, however, has a rain shadow. In other words, this overhang comes out enough to where this area does not get much natural rain. So there's difference in the rain in your ground moisture in both of these. So you need to determine, not only do you need to know how much rain you usually get, but you need to determine other situations in your microclimate that affect ground moisture. Next. So once you figure this out, what are you going to do with the information? You've got two choices. Later on, when we talk about plant choices, you may want to put your garden where you think is the best spot and just plant the type of plants that you think can thrive there. However, the more of these situations, bad microclimate situations that you can moderate, the wider range of plants you can grow. So if possible, you may want to fix some of these situations. Next. Okay, a tree will filter sun in midday. A shrub or a hedge of bushes, as well as buildings and structures, can block sun that would come in the afternoon. On this side, you'd put it on the west side, so to block afternoon sun, and keep these plants in part sun, part shade. And you wouldn't have to worry about scorching. Next. Yes, this is the same picture. The same thing can be said of wind. Instead of planting this on the west side, you would figure out where your strong winds come from. And that's where you would put a structure, or that side of a structure would plant opposite, or you would plant a hedge of big shrubs. Next. Then there's water issues, and we have a lot of those here in Kansas. This is the side of a mountain, and it was designed this way by the ancient Peruvians to catch and hold water. Otherwise, the water would just run down the side of this mountain. But they were able to plant in these terraces. Next. Other things that you might do, depending on your water situation, if your concern is erosion or that the water doesn't stick around, it may be a little different than if you're concerned with the water pooling. But ground cover catches and holds plants, catches and holds water and prevents erosion. A dry creek bed here slows it down and directs it so it's not eroding. We already talked about terraces. Raised beds do the same. And then there's water pooling. You can redirect your water with berms built up or swales. You can install drains, or you can just say, I'm happy with it, and try to plant a rain garden. Next. Okay. These are the things that I would like you to consider before you start deciding exactly where you want to put your garden site. Your purpose, think about it. Access, consider what you need there. Look at your views, and then understand your microclimate, and either modify it if it's needed, or decide that you're going to choose plants to live best in that situation. Is there any questions about what I've already covered, Ariel?
Right now, we don't have any questions, but if any of you do have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat box, and next time Linda stops, we'll review those.
Okay. The second part is to learn about and improve the soil at your site. Next. All right. I like this quote, soil is a living and life-giving substance without which we would perish. It is a national resource. Next. All right, soil is made up, we're going to do a little background information on soil before we talk about how to improve it. This is a diagram that shows approximately what soil is made up of. 45% mineral matter, about 5% organic matter, and about 50% pore space. And those pore spaces can hold air and or water. Next. Next. Okay, why is this important? A lot of people realize that your roots need moisture, they need water, but they also need enough empty pore space, or available pore space, I should say, for air to go in and out. Your roots breathe. Next. The other next part of your soil composition I want to talk about is your soil texture. That mineral matter that I showed you earlier. Small, tiny particles of minerals, and these come from the rocks deep beneath your soil that have eroded. And the ones that are very tiny are considered clay, and they pack very tightly together. The larger particles are called sand. And they have more spaces in between them. Silt is pretty much anything that's in between. Next. So what does that mean? Why do I care about all these things? If you have clay soil, those tiny particles that pack together, there's a lot of spaces over. Each particle has a surface, and nutrients, fertility, sticks to those surfaces, as does water. So your soil is going to be more fertile, and it's going to hold water better. However, it also doesn't drain very well. Water has a harder time getting in, and it has a harder time draining. Next. Sandy soils are pretty much just the opposite. They have that aeration and drainage. Water gets in and out, so does the air. However, they don't hold on to the water. They become dry, and they can't handle drought very well. They also require a lot more fertilization. Next. One way to know what kind of soil you have is to go in your backyard, get a shovel full of topsoil, and moisten your hand, make it into a ball, and squeeze it really tight. Then try to squish it between your thumb and your next finger, as this slide shows, and see if you can make a ribbon with your soil. If you can make a little bit of a ribbon, then you've got some clay soil. If you can make a ball, but it won't make a ribbon, you've got pretty good landscape soil. However, if it won't even hold together, then it's sandy. Next. Now, if you don't want to do that, I looked at the soil textural map of Shawnee County. And there's, I think it was 9 different associations, and different things are figured into that. But one of the things that is considered when they talk about what your soil association is a type of clay or sand in your soil, or the amount of clay or sand in your soil. If you see all the ones that are highlighted in yellow are the ones that are represented in the Shawnee County textural map. I took a midpoint and made a star right there for you to see that a midpoint would be about maybe 40% clay. That's what you can see on the left axis. And you look down below, 20% would be sand. Ideal soil is called loam. And that's the purple X over here, or purple cross. If you look at that, its midpoint would be less than 20% clay and a lot more sand. Next. I show you this because a lot of times people, in trying to deal with their clay soil, think, well, I just need more sand, and they try to add that. However, and this gets more scientific than I can tell you, but at the molecular level, you cannot, the 2 particles are different, and you can't mix them well enough on your own. What you end up with is a product that's more like concrete. So instead of improving your clay soil by adding sand, you make it much worse. Next. All right, another property I think is helpful to understand is fertility. Too much, not enough. Either can be a problem. There's 3 macronutrients. Those are the chemicals that your soil needs in the greatest amount: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And each one does different things for your plants. Nitrogen, you always think of as a green color. And phosphorus, you think of seeds and roots developing and fruits. And potassium, of helping your plants withstand stress. But all 3 are important. And you'll see these represented on any bag of fertilizer, and always in this order. The little cartoon character up here says 7, 15, and 10. That means it's 7% nitrogen, 15% phosphorus, and 10% potassium. Next. However, it's important to know that if you have no idea what your soil needs are, and you just pile on the fertilizer, you can do more harm than good. It has a negative impact on our water supplies, our wildlife, and our health. And this is one thing that could happen with too much nitrogen runoff. Next. And even phosphorus can be detrimental to your plants if you have too much. So the solution is to get a soil test. An initial soil test from your local extension agency is highly recommended. Next. We'll go over the details of soil tests in a minute. The other thing that you would like to know is the soil pH. You can also find that out with your soil test. pH is a range from 0 to 14, and it tells you how acidic or alkaline your soil is. Neutral is the midpoint, which is 7. Most plants are happiest with a pH of 6.5 to 7. Next. With that 6.5 to 7, that means your plants can take up and use all of the macronutrients and those minor nutrients in the soil that it requires for growth. If you look at this scale here, you look over to 5, which is pretty darn low, you're going to see a narrow strip or a blank area for some of your nutrients. Look at phosphorus. There's no phosphorus that your plant is able to take up if your pH is 5.0. Now, this is not what's in your soil. It's what your plants can actually take up and utilize. Same goes when your pH is way too high. You look at an 8.0 for your pH, and you look down iron, manganese, boron, copper, and zinc. So even if you add those to the soil, it's not really going to make much difference because your plant cannot take them up when their pH is off. You'll see here a form that you can get and fill out for your soil test. Next. So this is our website, shawnee.kstate.edu. After you go into that website, go on to the lawn and garden, moves you to the next page, and then next, you can go down to soil testing. There is a video here that shows you how to collect your soil sample. And then there are several places where you can click that'll give you all the details. So I really highly encourage you to do that. When we get to the next webinar on plants, we'll go over more about what your soil test means and for your plants and what to do for it. But for now, you need to know how to do it. And I encourage you all to do it as soon as possible if you're getting ready to plant a new garden. Next. All righty. Now that you understand a little more about soil and what you need, as soon as you have that soil test sent away to K-State, you can start to improve your soil. Dig in. Next. First thing you're going to do is add organic matter. Organic matter positively influences or modifies the effects of all soil properties. So it doesn't matter what your soil test says or what your texture is. Organic matter is always a good thing to add. Next. So what is organic matter? Well, organic matter can be a lot of things. If it was once living or is living, it's organic matter. Comes from plants, comes from animals. And this is a breakdown of about what you would like to have in your soil. The living organisms, fresh residue, decomposing organic matter, and then once it's finished decomposing, it becomes stabilized and is called humus. Next. Okay. This poor woman has a new home, and this is what they left her with for her front planting bed. There was concrete, there was dried paint, there was metal, there was plastic, there was all sorts of junk. But there wasn't a lot of topsoil, and it doesn't look like there's any organic matter. So this is where you would use what you've just learned. You're going to want to add your organic matter. Now, it depends on the time of year and what you have available. You can always buy some compost, or if you have somebody who's made their own, that's even better. But if you have time or have it available, adding some fresh residues is really a great idea. Some mowed up leaves or chopped up grass, even small bits of straw would help. Next. And the reason I'm asking you to also add this fresh residue is because that is the food that the soil organisms really go for. Okay. When I say soil organisms, Some you can see those earthworms, maybe those little pill bugs and some things like that. But there's also fungi, protozoa, good bacteria in your soil, and they all need organic matter, preferably fresh residues to get them going. Next. Okay, there is a caveat to incorporating organic matter. We used to think that it was a great idea when you were going to plant your plant to dig a hole and to take the soil that you took out of the soil, out of the hole, and mix it maybe 1/3, 2/3, or 50-50 with organic matter. Well, we found out that that is not a good idea. What happens is the sides of the hole are heavy. Like if you have clay, it's a lot different than what's in the middle, in the center of the hole, which would be loose soil mixed with compost. When the roots grow, they tend to grow in a circle around the hole. They don't want to go within it because it's not as friendly in that soil. The other problem is moisture. Water will collect in the looser soil that's in the hole, and then it doesn't drain out well, and you can drown your plants. Another thing about organic matter is that after organic matter sits there for a little while, all those organisms are working on it, they're breaking it down, and the level is going to shrink. So then, a year later, you may go out and look at your plants and find that its roots are sticking out of the ground. We call that cold shoulders. Next. So when you apply, okay, I should back up my thought just a little bit. So when you apply your compost, you need to apply it to a large area. If you're planting a tree, then maybe a 10 by 10 area would be a good place to, a good amount to put on your soil for that tree. If possible, however, when you're planting a bed, it's best to amend the entire bed rather than each planting hole. Okay, the next thing. By now, let's say you've got your soil test done, then you've went out and added organic matter to your spot. Then you need to look at your soil test results. I think they take, I don't know, maybe 10 days, 2 weeks, and you'll get them by email. And they will tell you the numbers you need to know as far as your pH and your fertility. But they're also going to tell you what you need to do specifically to improve your soil. How much of what type of fertilizer, and if you need to adjust your pH, how to do that also. Next. I do want to mention that when you get your soil test results back, if your soil needs quite a bit of help right now as far as fertility and pH, especially fertility, when you add your chemical fertilizers and inorganic fertilizer, it's going to act quickly. It's going to give you a quick fix like candy. However, after that, or if you don't need a whole bunch, you can start looking at organic fertilizers. Organic fertilizers are slower acting, but they're better for your soil health and they're in the long term. And they also don't leach out of your soil as easily. So that's another whole topic, and I'll leave you a reference to that later. But something I would like you to be aware of. If you're planting in the spring and you try to do the slower release organic fertilizers, you're not going to see the results for a while. Okay, next. Okay. Another way, and I just got a note from Kevin, thank you, Kevin, that is worth mentioning is that you can also use, I talked about spreading the compost all around the tree area. You can, every year or every season, you can go ahead and do that again around your tree but also around your other plantings. You don't have to just incorporate your compost when you plant. It's good to add it later by just using it as mulch around your plants. It'll work into the soil with freezes and thaws and with earthworms. It'll get in there. Okay, the next thing you do is, or don't want to do, is you don't want to ruin your soil structure. Remember I talked about those pore spaces? You want to keep those pore spaces opened so water and air can go in and out. However, if you back a giant truck up on your soil, that can compact your soil. I can't see the bottom. I think it's 6 to 8 inches down from heavy construction. But even smaller things. Have you ever looked at somebody's backyard? Do they have a dog that runs around and around the back fence? You'll see that is, you'll think, oh, they just wore off the grass. Well, what they've done is they've compacted that soil, so nothing wants to grow there. Your grass isn't going to grow in that area. Same with under a swing set. Okay, next. Another thing you never want to do is work in soggy soils. That's the quickest way to destroy your soil structure. In fact, if it's this wet, not only would I not work in it, I wouldn't even walk on it. Next. And then there's the subject of tilling. This got a lot of attention the last few years. We used to put all that organic matter on and crank up our tiller and just go at it. There may be situations where you need to till in your organic matter. But if you do not pulverize it. The better way is to, as you see this woman doing here, is to just dig big chunks and turn them over and then let the rest happen naturally. Or if you're not as big a hurry, we talked about earlier, you can just add it to the top and let the soil organisms and the weather move it down. Okay, next. All right, and then there's a last big no-no is don't allow bare soils. When we talked about the organic matter, we talked about living organisms. We talked about earthworms and protozoa and bacteria, but we also need roots. Your roots actually have a very special root zone, special purpose, I should say. In that root zone, that is that allows your microorganisms to get sugars from your roots, and it brings nutrients to the roots of your plants. So it's very helpful to have something planted in your soil. Also, as we talked about earlier, something on top is nice too. Next. But if you cannot plant it, or you're not ready to plant it, I would encourage you to think about cover crops. Or if it's a shorter time and you don't want to go that method, then make sure you add organic mulches. Organic, again, plant or animal. Mulches, straws, leaves, bark chips. There's quite a few things, but it is not rocks. Rocks and stones do nothing to improve your soil. In fact, they actually reflect heat, which can be bad. Yes, they may be necessary in a small spot to direct water away from something, but you're not going to want to be growing something where you have rocks. Next. Okay, let's go back. Site considerations. Think about your purpose. You may have multiple purposes in planting your garden. Do you want to, feed your family and feed your neighbors? Do you want to just have a beautiful landscape? Welcome somebody to the front door? Think about all the purposes. Then there is access and views. Think water, paths, steps. Then with the views, there is views from within looking out, from out looking in, and all the places you are going to be. Take a look at the views. And then last, of course, was your microclimates, where we talked about the amount of sun, the intensity of the sun, the soil moisture, and wind. Next. And of course, we finished up with once you know where you want your site to be, then it's time to improve that site. Get your soil test, amend it with your organic matter, and fix the pH if need be, and the fertility. I do want to say that, and I'll talk about that when we talk about plants. I'll address all of these issues a little bit more. Okay, and lastly, do not destroy your soil texture. Next. Okay, I can take questions. I have some here. I'll look at any other questions first, Ariel, and then I've got some things that I want to go over that people have asked when they signed up for the presentations. Are there
Okay,
anything?
that sounds great.
Okay.
We've got a couple really good ones in the chat.
Good.
So the first one was, you'd mentioned not adding sand to the clay, and I think you addressed it, but it's a really good question. What do you recommend as a remedy for the high clay soils?
Compost, organic matter, because it changes your soil structure in such a way that those the bad attributes are all minimized. It helps with pore space. It helps with water going in and out. It's just the miracle component.
Yeah, absolutely. Along those lines, our next question was, is cotton burr mulch still recommended as a soil amendment?
I haven't heard anything negative about it. So as far as I know, it is. I'd have to actually research that to give you a definite answer, but as far as I know, no, it's not a problem.
I'd heard the same. I think it's treated much like any other organic component that you're adding. So that's great. And then you answered Kevin's question. So that's all the questions we had in the chat. If you wanted to go over the ones you had, if anybody else had questions, feel free to put those in the chat.
Okay. I was asked what sources locally offer quality bulk soil and compost for the home gardeners' raised beds. I know there's several places around town where you can purchase it. Bags are in bulk, but the only one that I'm going to mention is the one run by the city, just because that's not. I don't want to recommend one company over another, but the city of Topeka has a biomass recycling area. It's run by Garrick. And it's at I-70 and McVicker. You can buy screen soil, compost. You can ask them to mix it half and half. You can buy mulch. The only problem is it's sold in cubic yards, which is, in my case, it's a pickup truck load full. They do seem to be accommodating when they can. So if you have a neighbor that wants some soil and you want some improved soil, you might both go down and they will attempt to give you both half of that load. I also asked them what they would do if you brought down buckets, and they seemed a little confused. I said, if somebody comes up with 5 or 6 5-gallon buckets and puts them down, he goes, well, we have to charge them for the whole thing, which isn't very much. But I think you'd probably end up having to scoop it yourself also. Okay. Anyway, okay, another question. How to water Kansas soil? That's a question that's probably going to be addressed somewhat, I think maybe in the third one on maintenance. But basically, clay soil, which most of our soil has to be watered slowly for a long time because it takes a while for that to get in. It also matters, of course, what you're watering. If you're watering lawns, you may want to water 6 inches deep twice a week during the heat of the summer. Your flowers once a week, maybe about the same depth. But when you go to things like shrubs and trees, deeper and less often. They recommend 8 to 12 inches every couple weeks for your shrubs, every 2 to 3 weeks. And for trees, I'll say soak it down to 12 inches every 3 to 4 weeks. And what you're doing is you're trying to get down to where the root zone is. Okay, that's your goal. And a good way to test that is to get a long screwdriver. So after you've watered slowly over a long period of time, then go out there, give it an hour or so, and then go see how far you can push that screwdriver into the ground. And that'll give you a pretty good idea of how deeply you've watered. One other thing for people starting trees that I think is a good idea is you can get a couple 5-gallon buckets, put holes around the bottom edge, and just sit them up, fill them up and sit them there, and they will slowly add water for your trees. Okay, another question. Well, I do want to mention we have a couple questions specifically about plants, and we'll be talking about that next week at the same time. So hopefully you've signed up for that also. We also have a few questions, or actually several, about vegetables. We'll be talking about vegetables in May. We'll have another group of 3 webinars called our Edible Gardening Series. If you're wanting to start before that, or you wanted to research information before, I'm going to hold this up. Can you see it? La Kansas Garden Guide. Okay. You can buy that from K-State. Occasionally they have it at the extension office. I'm not sure if it's available now. Okay. But also, Ariel, is that also online? Do we have that on our website?
Yes, and I'll put the link in the chat.
Great. Okay. And it is an excellent, excellent reference. Okay, more about this time. Somebody says, all right, how do you evaluate soil when landscaper has hauled in topsoil for terracing and has filled in other areas with clay unearthed from the terracing? Well, hopefully what they have done is they've tried to put the heavier soil, the clay soil, in the bottom and put lighter soil, lighter topsoil on top. Because that is, otherwise, if they left all the lighter soil in one big pile, then you'd have that problem with the soil shrinking, and your terraces would disappear. But the other thing I want to say is, anytime you do a soil test, you're going to take several samples, and again, please go to our website and look at the video and read the information that we have there, and that'll tell you how to do it. But you're going to be doing several deep spots in each area. If your area is huge, you'll have several different soil samples that you're turning in. So each one would have several soil from several spots. Does that make sense? Okay. All right, let me see. Worm castings, that's another wonderful, it's a type of compost, organic compost, great for the soil, yes. Go ahead and add it. You're improving the structure, you're adding beneficial microbes, and a little bit of fertility. So yes, that's a good addition to your soil. Okay, the last one I think is somebody has a new home with moles and they're wanting to know what they should do. Do I need to worry about my gardening with moles? Well, that's not something I can tell you right off the top of my head, but I can tell you when we talk access, and that's one of the things you want to look at. If you have a mole tunnel that is active, and you can tell that, stomp it down and see if they return. And if so, it's an active mole tunnel. Then you either need to set a trap or you need to move your garden. If you're just starting one, don't choose that spot. They eventually tend to go away, but it may be a while. Okay. All righty. Any other questions?
Nothing else in the chat. Thank you so much,
Great.
Linda, for going over. She was going over some of the questions that you guys put in your registration. I think that's wonderful. Thank you for answering those.
Well, good. Well, join us next week and we'll dive a little deeper into these topics when we talk about plant selection.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Linda, you always put in so much excellent information in a concise, easily to understandable way. And I just really appreciate this presentation. I love it. Thank you so much, Linda. And tell me.
Oh, I just thought of one other thing. When you go to the Shawnee County Extension website, there's so many other references there. If you want to know more about some of the topics that we've talked about today, there are references there. I did a webinar on soils, which goes a lot deeper into what I said today back in February. I know that's there. Xeriscaping. It's just, there's just lots of information there. So
Perfect.
check it out.
Thank you, Linda. And as she was saying, please join us next week where Linda will tell us about the right plant and the right place. So another Tuesday at 2, March 16th. We hope to see you there. Thanks all.
Bye.